There's an organ inside you right now that doctors spent over a century calling useless. A leftover, an evolutionary fossil so pointless that the most famous biologist in history personally wrote it off. It does basically nothing, except occasionally try to kill you. That organ is your appendix, and here's the twist. Almost everything I just said is wrong. So today, we're going to figure out what this little weird tube is actually doing in there, why surgeons remove hundreds of thousands of them a year, and why small groups of scientists now think it's been quietly protecting your life all along. First, let's meet the organ. Your appendix is a thin worm-shaped pouch, usually somewhere between 2 and 4 inches long, dangling off the spot where your small intestine meets your large intestine in the lower right side of your abdomen. The name even reflects how little anyone thought of it. Vermiform appendix literally means worm-shaped appendage, an add-on, like the appendix at the back of a book that nobody reads. For most of medical history, the story was simple. This thing is a vestige, a leftover, evolutionary baggage. And the man most associated with that idea? Charles Darwin. Darwin looked at the appendix and figured it was a shrunken remnant of a much larger organ our plant-eating ancestors used to digest tough leafy diets, kind of like the big fermentation chambers you find in animals that eat a lot of vegetation. As our ancestors' diets changed, the theory went, that organ shriveled up into a little dead-end tube we have today, useless, on its way out, just waiting for evolution to finish deleting it. For about 150 years, that was the consensus. The appendix was the body part you mentioned in biology class as the classic example of a vestigial organ right next to wisdom teeth and goosebumps. There was just one problem with the it's useless and disappearing story, and to see it, we have to look beyond humans. Here's where it gets strange. If the appendix were just a useless leftover slowly being phased out, you'd expect evolution to be getting rid of it. That's what evolution does with things you don't need. Over millions of years, they fade away, use it or lose it. But that's not what the appendix does. In 2017, an evolutionary biologist named Heather Smith led an international team that did something nobody else had done at this scale. They gathered data on the presence or absence of the appendix across 533 mammal species and mapped it onto a genetic family tree to track how the appendix evolved through mammalian history. And what they found flipped Darwin's story on its head. The species that have an appendix are scattered so widely across the evolutionary tree that the structure must have evolved independently at least 32 times, and possibly as many as 38. Let that sink in. The appendix didn't evolve once and then start disappearing. It evolved over and over and over again, independently, in totally separate branches of the mammal family tree. And here's the kicker. Once it showed up in a lineage, it almost never disappeared again. In evolution, that pattern means something very specific. When nature keeps reinventing the same structure in different animals at different times and then refuses to let go of it, that's the signature of a trait that does something useful. Evolution doesn't keep rebuilding junk, it builds and keeps things that help an organism survive long enough to reproduce. So the 30 times problem leaves us with a glaring question. If this organ is so useful that evolution keeps reinventing it, what is it actually for? To answer that, we have to talk about the trillions of organisms living in your gut right now. Your intestines are home to a vast community of bacteria, your gut microbiome. And these aren't invaders, they're more like tenants who pay rent. They help you break down food, they train your immune system, they even produce chemicals that affect your mood. The gut feeds and shelters these bacteria, and in return, they help your digestive system process what you eat. It's one of the great partnerships in biology. But that partnership has a vulnerability. What happens when something goes badly wrong down there? A serious infection, a nasty case of food poisoning. Your body's defense is brutally effective and brutally simple. Flush everything out. Diarrhea, a disease like dysentery, can completely empty the good bacteria out of your intestines, which solves the immediate problem of the infection but creates a new one. Now your gut is a wasteland. All your helpful tenants just got evicted, and an empty gut is dangerous because whatever bacteria recolonizes first wins, and you'd much rather it be good tenants than something harmful. This is where in 2007, a team at Duke University led by surgeon William Parker proposed an idea that would resurrect the appendix's reputation. What if the appendix is a safe house? Look at the appendix's design again, but this time like an engineer instead of a doctor. It's a blind tube, closed at one end with a very narrow opening, and it sits off to the side at the junction of a small large intestine tucked away from the main flow of waste passing through. In other words, it's the one room in the house that doesn't get flushed. The hypothesis goes like this. When a bout of diarrhea evacuates your intestines, a reserve population of good bacteria can ride it out, safe inside the appendix, and then emerge afterward to repopulate the gut. It's a biological backup drive. When the system crashes, the appendix reboots it. And the bacteria in there aren't just hiding loose. The appendix is lined with resilient communities called biofilms, basically fortified bacterial cities, and it's packed with lymphoid tissue, immune tissue, that supports and protects those good bacteria rather than attacking them. Think about that. The immune cells in the appendix may not be there to fight bacteria, they may be there to farm them, to protect the good guys and keep the colony healthy until they're needed. Now, to be honest, the safe house idea is a hypothesis and it has real challenges. Here's the most obvious one. In that big evolutionary study, only about 50 of the 361 mammal species analyzed actually have an appendix. And critics raise a fair point. If this organ is so brilliantly useful, why doesn't every animal have one? Why aren't appendixes universal? That's a genuine gap, and the scientists studying this will tell you the mystery isn't fully solved. But researchers have started gathering real-world evidence. If the appendix really is a bacterial reserve tank, then people who've had theirs removed should be slower to bounce back after their gut gets wiped out. So researchers ran that exact study, tracking gut bacteria recovery in 59 adults with and without an appendix, before and after a colonoscopy. And more broadly, the pattern showing up across studies is suggestive. Losing the appendix has been associated with lower gut bacterial diversity and an increased risk of certain diseases, which raises the obvious slightly nervous question for the millions of people who've had theirs taken out. If you're one of the many people who've had an appendectomy, relax. The news is genuinely reassuring. In general, people who've had their appendix removed tend to be perfectly healthy with no major detrimental effects. The researcher who led that big evolutionary study, Heather Smith, had hers removed at age 12. And she's the one championing the idea that the organ matters. The likely reason it's no big deal? You don't live in the world your appendix evolved for. In a modern environment with clean water, refrigeration, plumbing, and antibiotics, the catastrophic gut wipeout infections that would have made a bacterial backup drive life-saving are, thankfully, rare. Your appendix is insurance against the disaster most of us in the developed world will never face. That said, some studies suggest people without an appendix may have slightly higher rates of certain infections. So why remove it at all? Because of the one thing the appendix is genuinely undeniably famous for, appendicitis. Roughly 1 in 1,000 people in the US get it, most commonly between ages 10 and 30. The appendix gets blocked, inflamed, infected, and if it bursts, it can spill infection through the abdomen and become deadly. When that happens, removing it is the right call, every time. A backup drive isn't worth dying for. There's a bitter irony buried in there. The very thing that makes the appendix useful, that narrow, tucked away, easily sealed off design that protects the bacteria, is exactly what makes it prone to getting blocked and infected in the first place. The feature and the flaw are of the same piece of anatomy. So let's zoom out, because I think this little organ has something to teach us that's bigger than digestion. For 150 years, we don't know what it does, quietly became it doesn't do anything. Those are not the same statement. One is a fact about the limits of our knowledge, the other is a confident claim about the world, and we mix them up. About an organ sitting inside billions of people for over a century. The appendix wasn't useless. We were just looking at it with the wrong question. We asked, what does it digest? When we should have been asking, what does it protect? It's still possible the safe house hypothesis turns out to be incomplete, or that the appendix does several things at once. Scientists are even now investigating whether it influences mood and cognition through bacteria that produce neurotransmitters. The story isn't finished, but that's kind of the point. This is a part of the human body, your body, that we're actively still trying to figure out right now in the 21st century. So the next time someone tells you the appendix is a useless leftover, you'll know the truth. It's not a glitch. It might just be one of the most quietly clever pieces of engineering you'll ever carry around. A tiny, fortified vault holding a backup copy of you.